The views and opinions heard on this show do not necessarily reflect the views of the host.
There had to be someone, not something, because things were out, second law of thermodynamics. There had to be someone without beginning or end who had the power and the knowledge, the wisdom, the incredible, infinite intelligence to put all this together, from the organization of the atom to the cosmos and so forth.
When we look at the many examples of God's power, it should invoke a sense of reverence and awe in our hearts.
Truly, our Creator is the God of wonders, and the greatest wonder is His immeasurable love.
Welcome back to Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, continuing to bring you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my special guest will be the Reverend Peter Panagore, whose near-death experience potentially put him at odds between his actual experience and his congregation. Let's get it started. Ladies and gentlemen, joining me via telephone is international author, broadcaster, counselor, professional speaker, and two-time near-death experiencer, the Reverend Peter Panagore. Reverend, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here, Lamont, and please call me Peter.
Very good. A down-to-earth Reverend.
Yeah.
So, your resume based on your website is extremely abundant from what I can see. Was I correct? Did you have not one, but two near-death experiences?
That is correct.
I also saw that you are a graduate of Yale University with a Master's of Divinity with a concentration in mysticism. Is that correct too?
That is right too.
So I see we will have a lot to cover here, but before we get into that, and before we get into your actual near-death experience, I'd like to go backwards. Tell us about your origin story as a child. What was it that you learned that may have aided you in your spiritual journey from parents or adults concerning the nature of God, religious belief systems, etc.?
Well, it wasn't so much what I was taught as what happened to me as a child. This is kind of difficult to say. An angel came to me and told me that I belonged to God and that I would spend my life in this pursuit. And I had intended never to become a clergy person, although I had gone in the house that day and told my mom the story. And she said, "Oh, you'll be a priest." But I decided to be an architect. And my journey to the ministry came not from anything other than that and my near-death experience. Before I died, I was an English major, undergrad, aiming toward an architectural graduate degree to join the family business. And then I died and everything changed. And I decided to go hide inside the church ultimately as a mystic. But my route there was via a Trappist exposure to a Trappist monastery and a decision to get a graduate degree at Yale before I went to a monastic life.
So let's go back a bit. You said an angel appeared to you. How old were you when this happened?
5.
5. What did this angel look like? Was it in physical form or shimmery, as one would see in a near-death experience?
No, none of those things. It was a voice. I was a kindergartner, and I was waiting for my sisters to come home from school, and I was sitting in the maple tree in the front yard, and my little notch, one branch up, and I was watching the flicking leaves with maple color, dark and light in the breeze, and I suddenly heard this voice speak to me behind me and inside of me, and it had no voice to it. It had no sound to it. It surrounded me, and it felt like this was in heaven and here at the same time. And it said to me, "You belong to me. You belong to me."
Did you tell anyone about this voice you heard?
Oh, I told my mom. And I got in trouble because I went back in the house and the baby was sleeping.
That would certainly get you in trouble.
It did. And I told my mom, and my mom was ironing clothes in the kitchen, and she said, well, then you'll be a priest, is what she said. Because that isn't what I heard. What I heard was, you belong to me, and you work for me. And she's interpreted it according to her religious tradition, and I'd be a priest. And so I had to learn how to iron and clean and dust. And because I came in the house, I could begin right then and dust the furniture. So I got punished. So that was my mystical life. I think that people are born mystical. I think that everybody has mystical experiences lonely. Many people, half the population, I would say, have a mystical experience according to the definition by William James from Harvard Divinity School in 1911, and his varieties of religious experience. And my experience of the angel, although young and out of the ordinary, is not unique. And that I think that there's a much larger population of Americans and not just Americans, but human beings all over the world who are afraid to talk about these things because it's taboo.
Yes, you can say that again. In fact, many who return from a near-death experience tend to have a tough time expressing what they saw. So let's move forward into your entrance into clergy. Up to this very point, you've got some sort of experiential degree of mysticism based on what you just experienced as a child. And I'm sure your counterparts have never experienced this or would even question you on it.
Yeah, not only did they have it, they didn't know that I had it because I kept it a secret, because I knew that I was essentially entering into the clergy as a mystical heretic. In the West and Protestantism, the history of mysticism, the reality of mysticism in Christianity was belittled and not only belittled, but they used to kill them and eventually ostracize them. And so I felt like I felt like I was God's secret spy, like an agent working in the church. And I was working in the church because I wanted to serve people, but because it gave me the opportunity to pursue in an intensified way a life of prayer in public. Nobody was going to question my meditation practices and my yoga practices as long as I was a successful community pastor with a strong orientation toward presentation and scholarship. So as long as I was doing my job, nobody was going to question how much time I spent in prayer and in research. So I got my degree in mysticism, divinity degree with a focus in mysticism. But then I continued to pursue it as a pastor, and brought that to the pulpit, but always within the context of the traditional culture of this denomination, in the language that they were comfortable with. But every single time lying to them, by saying that I was a believer, and I was not, because I'm not a believer. That was erased from me. I know God is real, and I know where I'm from, and I know where I'm going. And as a result of that, and an after effect is I'm unafraid to die.
Now, just for clarity, let me ask, what type of church were you a part of, denomination-wise? Were you Catholic or a Protestant?
I was raised Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, and I got ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is a progressive American denomination.
Okay, you also stated that you were lying to your counterparts, saying you were not a believer, but what does that mean exactly? What was it that you were lying about?
Well, because in Christianity, what amounts to Gnosticism was made heretical more like 1,200 years ago or 1,800 years ago. And so to know that you're known by the knower is a heretical position for most denominations. And because the only way you can't know God, which is true, you can't know the totality of the ineffable, but you can be known by it. And so the difference is that I liken it to science, in that the great thing about science is you don't have to believe in it for it to be real, right? So, but my experience of the divine is it's more like that I have to believe in the glass that I'm holding, my water glass that I'm holding in my hand right now. I have to believe that that's real, because to me, as a result of my near-death experience, and I'd like to add that the results of the near-death experiences of tens of millions of us we know that our consciousness does not arise in our body, and that we inhabit our body, and that it's more like a radio receiver, to use, technology from last century, as an example, that I'm not my physical form first. I am my soul first. And so to know that and understand that and not have to believe in it, is a very different position.
So in other words, you're not a believer in their organized, dogmatic religious views, but instead as a self-described mystic who is spiritual.
Summarized exactly.
Okay, that's squared away with. So let's go into your near-death experience account. What exactly prompted its occurrence?
Youthful exuberance. I went ice climbing. I was a backpacker, mountaineer, winter person, skier, ski patrol. So this was not something out of the ordinary for me. But I made a miscalculation in my equipment, and I was ice climbing in Banff Provincial Park. And as a result of my poor decision making at 21 years old, when we reached the top of the climb that day, the sun set, temperature dropped 30 degrees, and we became immediately in danger of dying of hypothermia, which is what killed me hours and hours later.
What happened as you were dying from hypothermia?
Well, toward the end, hypothermia is a progressive experience that goes through noted stages, and at the very end of the process, one begins to fall asleep, and then tunnel vision can result as this happens, and you die. And I died. I was on the cliff. Set the scene. I was with my partner Tim, who is the lead climber and also a certified climber, and we were harnessed into the rock itself with some permanently installed straps that are pinned into the mountain. Tim is to my left. I'm to the right. It's now 10 or 12 hours into our adventure, and I was falling asleep. The rope was tied to my harness, and the rope was jammed, and only I could pull the rope given our positions. And I began to fall asleep, and I would collapse, and I would lose consciousness. I'd fall asleep, my brain would lose consciousness, just like when you fall asleep at night, and I would collapse and hit the rock. Because I was strapped into the mountain, I wouldn't fall, and the shock of which would awaken me. That repeated. And then I stood up this one time, and as I stood up, tunnel vision came, and it faded to black like a spotlight on a stage, and instead of collapsing or losing consciousness, my consciousness stayed awake. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? I didn't recognize what tunnel vision was either. That was my first clue that there was a problem. And when the fade to black, I didn't lose consciousness as if I had fallen asleep. I was still functional in my brain, thinking. And I wondered what was going on, and I thought I didn't collapse. And then I wondered, well, how come I couldn't feel myself? But I was conscious, but I couldn't feel my body. And the next thing I knew, my vision expanded outside of myself, in front of myself, and I saw a void, a dark void that was larger than the universe, from end to end. And far, far in the distance, a pinprick of light appeared and came rushing toward me faster than the speed of light. And it communicated to me directly inside of me without voice, I'm taking you. And I said, no, you're not. And I put up my willpower to stop it, but I had no strength in comparison, and it just took me. And it was like an intelligence, not like an intelligence. It was intelligence. It was comfort and contentment, and it exuded these things into me with an all-powerful being that I had never encountered anything like before. And I was comforted by it. And it traveled with me. It carried me. My angel, I call it, my angel carried me into a greater darkness that was illuminated, where I became an orb of consciousness. No body, no things, no time.
So did you receive any specific information via this nonverbal communication? As it's heavily noted, communication is typically telepathic in this realm, correct?
Yes. All of this was telepathic from the moment that I was plucked from before I was plucked from my body. But on the other side, the the essential message that I received was that love is everything there is. Love is more than the structure of the universe. It's the construct of God in entirety. Love is the operative. Love is the creator, and that it's more love than all of the love ever that's existed on earth between humans and humans and humans and animals, all condensed into one spot times septillion times 10 septillion. It's so much more eternal, so much greater, so permanent, so healing. And over there, it's this unitive state of being where, for me anyway, I can only speak for myself, where love and joy, beauty, healing, wholeness, understanding, adoration, awe, bliss, paradise, knowledge, wisdom, truth were all one thing. They were not separate fragments as they are here. They were a unified state of being that entered into me, forgiveness and mercy and understanding and knowingness in the presence of the Creator. I was creature that was separate and unified at the same time. All paradox, all timelessness, all home.
That's a mighty long list, although not unexpected given the various accounts on that side. Speaking of that side, by the way, what exactly would you call that side? Heaven is certainly a term, but I would think for someone who's experienced that side, that terminology would be a bit bland.
Well, that is the word that I use most commonly because it is the common culture expression of it. But for me, it's a place of nothing. I went to the no thing place. I went to the place of the all in the all, of the eternal, infinite wonderfulness, the root of the core of my beingness, the wholeness of myself, my home. But I call it heaven because it's easier for people to hear.
So take us through what happened next after being loaded with this information that many would say one could never retrieve in 100 or more years of living on planet Earth.
Or 100,000 years on planet Earth.
Correct.
I entered into the state being popped up by the angelic entity of intelligence into this eternal illuminated darkness where the first thought was, this is me. This is me. Now I remember me. And I tell the story in a sequence, timeline chronological, but that's not the way I experienced it because it's timelessness. And so everything I say is always metaphor and it's always timelessness. And it's only an approximation of the inexpressible. And so I'm an orb of consciousness 10,000 times bigger than I was as Peter the human. And I realized that I never was Peter the human. I was always this orb of consciousness and that my eye and my eyes and my ears and my nose and my feeling and my thinking and my self-understanding and my knowledge is all one thing. Because I have no brain and I have no fingertips, but all of my sensation and more is all of the containment inside of this orb of existence of being. And a portal appeared. And it was I call it a doorway, a gateway, an opening, and it was a translucent and transparent door, flow, energy field, through which I could see a tunnel extending into the infinite darkness that was illuminated kind of through it to another location far away. But it was also translucent and almost looking solid with this flow. And so I touched it with my being. And when I touched this flow with my being, it flowed into me like all love, light, allness, oneness, wholeness. And the voice that was the entire space and I was in. The voice was the infinite space I was in, but it was also localized outside of my orb of consciousness, but I couldn't see it. And it spoke without language, downloading into me, communication, that I was creature created. I heard my soul name called, the name that I can't say, that called me into being eons and eons and eons ago in time and space, but there was no time and space. And I could see the long tail of my everlasting soul and the spoken location of the origin of my being that became, as Genesis says, an image of the divine, like a fragment broken off, like a photon separated from all of the light of all of the universe. When I was a singular form, and I was both unified with the oneness of being and separate from it, created by it. And I was utterly and fully known. And I could see the layer of Peter, the shimmer of like a covering on the top of my soul, and bifurcations of micron thin other existences that I'd lived, but none of them were me. The only me that was truly me was the essence of my consciousness, the soul of myself, and all these others were less than. But then even simultaneous to this, I went through a purgative fire of divine love in which I had my life review, but my life review is the witnessing from the point of view of everyone who I had hurt in my entire life, and every event that I had hurt them, intentionally or unintentionally, in a sequence of their pain and response to the pain that I gave them, times 10,000 times, because all the pain I ever gave away in my life, I turned out not just to give it to the people, I gave it to myself, and it was 10,000 times greater in every single part of it than I ever imagined that it was. And I simultaneously self-judged guilty because my mind went through all of the justifications and reasons that I had given to cause that pain, given to myself to cause that pain. And meanwhile, the voice was speaking inside me. I know you. I've always known you. There's nothing about you that's ever been hidden from me. I know you and I love you. I love you as my creature. I love you as my created one, my beloved one. I forgive you. I forgive you. I know you. And I was then, all of those things vanished, and all of that pain vanished, and I became healed in a way where any memory of suffering ended for me. Any connection to any sort of pain was utterly gone from me. I no longer carried that burden, and I was infilled with all the list of words that I used before in a string of expressing a unitive state that I can't explain.
Wow, that is a lot to lay down on one of your congregants.
I'm sorry, man.
Who's coming to hear your sermon.
Well, yeah, that's right. Imagine I never talked about it.
I do get it, though. Now, you refer to the persons that you were. Were you referring to reincarnation of some sort?
Yeah, except for that, yes, I was. Except for that, it wasn't like anything. It was because I was in the space of timelessness. They seemed like concurrent extensions of my soul in spaces that I now can't see. Did I see those other lives when I was there? I don't know. I can't remember because I can't see it. But I do know one thing, that not one of them was me. They were all, so in terms of the how much does reincarnation matter? Not at all. Because as long as I'm focusing on my reincarnated forms, I'm still worried about the human condition of my soul.
A physical form.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I'm following you. I'd be one of the few sitting in the pews actually understanding what you're saying. You also sound as if you're speaking of a premortal existence. Many times we hear this concept in near-death experiences, which actually, speaking of clergy and biblicism, this reminds me of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5, where it states, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Now, many have given this argument wholeheartedly over to pro-life and abortion arguments, but premortal existence is pretty much how I interpret it.
You're right. That's what we're talking about. And not only is it time before you were born in the womb, it's the time after you are when you go home again. Because it's like if I could draw my soul life is like a layer in the sky and a long line, and then in a straight line, and then my physical life is this drop down inverted curve, like on a waveform that comes down. The line continues. The waveform starts in one location, touches Earth, and comes back up again. But the line above it continues for everlastingly. And we get stuck in this waveform down here. We're stuck in this expression of the holy in a material world in which we are blinded to the existence of our true everlasting nature.
So what else occurred in this space? Did you receive more information? Did you head back to your body?
No, I was filled with adoration, to put it into a single word. And I said to the holy voice that had no gender and no sounds, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. And I said, well, I can't die yet. And the voice said, welcome home. Come, my beloved child, come home. And I said, but my parents. And the voice swept me over to see my parents, who were suffering the loss of a child, not dead, but worse than dead, gone. And I watched my parents suffer a decade of emotional breakdown. And that's why I was out west in the first place, because I was escaping that particular issue. And when I was swept to the edge of heaven, at the edge of the universe, where I could look down, I was looking down, shown down, Earth like a hologram. And on this hologram of Earth that was both distant and far and near and close, I could see every single individuated human being. I could see their eyes and their hair and their what they were doing all over Earth. Wars and babies being born and love making and gardening and suffering. And I could see every single person, and everybody of the 7 billion were all covered with the veil of unknowing, the veil of unknowing, the veil of forgetfulness. And I could see my parents' faces, in particular, and I could see their current suffering, and I was shown the length of their life without me there. And the voice said to me, my beloved, you now know there is wholeness and healing and the end of suffering, and you are well, were well, and will be well, and so will everyone else. And so will your parents when their life ends. Come home to me. They will be well too. You do not need to go back. And I said, do I have to stay here? I haven't gone through the door yet. Can I go back to help? And the voice said, yes, you can go back, but I want you to stay here. I said, if I go back to help, can I come back to this unified state of heaven? And the voice said, yes, you can come back. And I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life. And then I was sent back, and I was presented with like 10 million entry points back into my life. And there was like a core of a beam of pure light in the center of this circle of 10 million choices. And I made a choice to come in close to the light, but not in the core. I could have gone in the core. I chose not to go into the core. I chose to kind of hang around in the bohemian, hedonistic spirituality sort of side, and I can't even tell you why I made that choice. But then I was crushed down and shoved back inside my body, and it was painful and awful, and I was confused and lost, and that began that return to my physical form began a whole new life for me as a new person.
Now that's interesting. Would you go on to say that this being was God or something close to it?
It was God. It was so self-evident to me that there was no, all I can say is that.
Another observation I'd like to comment on is that many accounts have people being told to go back or that it wasn't their time. But here you're saying God wanted you to remain as if you've completed your length of time. Also, you wanted to go back yourself, whereas many others would say that if they were given the choice, they would have stayed.
Well, here's why I was able to make that choice. Because I knew the length of any physical life is the length of a wink of a human eye. I was in timelessness. And I knew that because I could return to timelessness, that I would always be there. Even when I was incarnated back into my body, I knew I could not only return there, but the trueness of the essence of my being was already there.
Tell us what happened after attempting to share your experience with friends, colleagues, and so on.
Well, it was a hard kind of coming out. I kept a secret for 20 years. I told my wife the morning after we were married, and I told two friends. I told my best friend who understood, and then I told a man who became one of my best friends. Those three, my wife and my two friends, it scared me to tell them because I knew that I could never express exactly what I was trying to say, but they loved me anyway, and that was good enough for me. I trusted the community where I live, where I was a pastor in a congregational United Church of Christ church, where there had been 20 years of embezzlement, and I came in for the last 10 of it, causing poison in the church, and we uncovered the truth, and it was terrible. They tried to fire me and defrock me and ruin me personally and professionally, the small group protecting the thief. But in the end, when that was all over, I trusted the people of my church that I could tell them the truth. And so I climbed in the pulpit one day after the deacons came to me and apologized for the terrible treatment of me over all the years that I was fighting to find the truth. And they said to me with their emissary, "You must have had a lot of faith." And I was like, I've got to stop lying to these people. I don't have any faith at all. I am not a believer. God is real to me. It's this place that I have to believe in, to function in. And so it went okay.
What about the more rigid conservative clergy counterparts that may have heard your account? What was the reception?
I'm a heretic. I'm regularly attacked. I knew I was jumping into the arena, and I knew that I'd be receiving spears and thrown spears and shot arrows from the bleachers high above me, and that's the case. But I blocked them on my YouTube channel, and because you know the way I see it is that I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm here only to seek the people who see the light or who want to see the light, who are in the light, among the tens of millions of near-death experiencers who've been bathed in it, to find everyone else who's participating, and let those who have a different point of view live their karma.
You know, I'd have to bring you back for your second near-death experience as I'm a bit pressed for time. This is all extremely fascinating, however. Your book, which is one of a few that you've written, is called Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. Where can people find that?
PeterPanagore.love for all the links all over the world, but Amazon, everywhere, at fine bookstores.
Well, Peter, I'd like to bring you back, and I thank you for joining us here. You seem to have a lot of information to share with us, and based on the many things that happen in that realm, in this realm, a lot more of that is good.
All right, let's come back.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Peter Panagore. And I would like to thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, urging and begging you to keep listening so that you too can become spiritually enlightened. And with that, Real Spiritual Talk Radio is now signing off.